Do you think of yourself as climate conscious? With the COP26 Climate Change Summit drawing to a close, I caught up with Sarah Pennells from Royal London to chat about responsible investing with your pension. Their new research found that more than 3/4 of us claim to be climate conscious, but more than 2/3 of pension savers are unaware their pension could be used in the fight against climate change. Pensions have the power to protect the future of the planet, but first we need to understand what responsible investing involves and how we can identify suitable responsible investments. So if you want to harness the power of your pension investments to help secure the future of the planet, this conversation with Sarah is a great place to start. We're going to talk today a little bit about pensions and how they can be invested for good, and how we can understand that. But clearly it's week 2 of COP26, United Nations Climate Change Summit this week, and this makes all of this very topical. Is there anything that you've seen from COP26 that's particularly sort of caught your eye and made you think about money and pensions and climate change?
I've been involved in watching a couple of events from online, so I haven't gone up to Glasgow, but I have seen quite a few of the events, both the main events, so the ones sort of involving all the world leaders, and also some in the green zone. And I think a couple of things are coming through, and one is sort of, I think, the real focus and energy that sort of time is running out, and we really have got to take this seriously. And that's all incredibly sort of positive. But I suppose, and we don't quite know how the final sort of agreement's going to look. But I think there is also a real concern that although there isn't renewed focus on climate change because we are seeing the evidence around us, but also actually when it comes down to kind of, signing that, is it really going to go far enough? And there've been obviously a lot of young people involved in COP26, unofficially as well as officially. And for them, this isn't some way down the track, some life that maybe some of us can't imagine. We're talking about what happens to them when they're in their 30s and 40s and so on. And it really brings it to life. A lot of companies and governments are talking about 2050 and being net zero. And that's when some of these young people are going to be in their sort of 40s and 50s. So I think really that sort of real focus, but fingers crossed to hope that actually we do get an agreement that means that we can limit the effects of climate change.
No, absolutely, and it's good to see some of the early measures that have come out of it around deforestation and methane emissions, coal power, for example. I know as we're recording, we're seeing some more announcements coming through now about a draft agreement. So fingers crossed by the time this goes live, that would have solidified and we'll have something concrete to work with. Yeah. So tell us a bit about this research, which clearly coincides with COP26 and really looks at the impacts of pensions. What were some of the key findings?
Yeah, I think we were really keen to explore sort of what people feel about their pension money and what it can be used for. And it's something we've done some sort of research on earlier in the year in terms of sort of lifestyle changes that people were making and how they felt about the impact that could have on the climate and helping protect the planet. So this was really sort of building on that. And what we found was that a lot of people think that they are climate conscious. And, I guess that's not a surprise. And, in this week of all weeks. So around 3/4 of people, just over 3/4, said they would describe themselves as climate conscious. And you think, well, so far so good. But actually almost 2/3 of people were sort of can be invested in a way that can protect or help protect the planet. And over half didn't know how their pension was invested. And again, in some ways you're thinking, well, I think for many years, the focus really has been on the benefits of a pension in financial terms. So, this, as well as anybody, that we'll be talking about not having just to rely on the state pension. I guess crucially these days, not having to wait until the state pension kicks in to be able to retire. And so I guess for lots of people paying the money in, month in, month out, it goes out of their salary or earnings. That's really what they're thinking about their pension for. But, as you know, there's a whole other side to pensions, and that is, your pension money isn't put into a bank account or kind of mouldering away in a cellar somewhere. It's being invested on your behalf. But that's the bit that people haven't thought about for reasons that I think are completely understandable. And that's where obviously the money that they're setting aside today and tomorrow can have an impact, a direct impact, I think, on the kind of world that they then retire into.
So quite a big gap really between best intentions and tangible action when it comes to how our pension monies are deployed. So on that basis, assuming people do want to take those good intentions and turn them to good actions with their pension monies, how can we use pensions to fight climate change?
It's a really good question. And I think it's something that, the industry pension providers like ourselves have been sort of putting a lot of thought into. And there are a range of different approaches. And I think one of the things that maybe is putting some people off who are interested in this is that the language and the terminology around kind of responsible, sustainable, green investing can be a bit confusing and can be off-putting. So the approach that we take at Royal London is that we look at sort of the environmental, social and governance factors, ESG, and take those into account when working out sort of where to invest and what to hold. That instead of just investing in shares in a company and then just looking to see, keeping an eye on the profits but nothing else, basically, the fund managers, the research team will be holding regular meetings with the management, will be putting pressure on them sometimes through annual general meetings, may vote against the company rather than with them, and may also collaborate with other pension providers or others in the industry to actually work out, well, hang on, are you doing everything you can? Is there more you can and should be doing to maybe lessen your environmental impact or lessen your carbon footprint, for example? So I think one of the issues around when people start thinking about, oh, actually, hang on, I do want my pension to be invested responsibly, is sometimes you can look at, companies that you think, well, I want my money to go into good companies, in inverted commas. And then when you look at where your money's invested, you think, well, hang on, that's not right. But it's a bit more complicated than that. And that's not, I'm not saying that to put anybody off, but it's just, there are different approaches. I think the view that we take with engaging, and a number of providers take as well, is that if you can get a really large company to change the way it operates, and particularly we're talking about the environment, so to lessen its impact on the environment, that can have a huge effect.
Yeah. And
if you decide to divest, to basically sell up, the chances are somebody else will buy it, and they may not have that same approach. So that's why, so there are different ways that you can achieve this kind of aim. But it is worth thinking, I think, about sort of what matters to you, but also doing a bit of digging around what your own pension provider is doing. And what are they telling you about what that means in practice? What examples can they give you? How do they explain what they're doing? Because it may not be as simple as it looks on the surface.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whenever we talk to our clients about this subject, we always say this is about progress, not perfection. And I think that is encapsulated within the corporate governance approach, as you say, trying to make a difference, trying to make improvements to the way companies behave, not necessarily believing that responsible investing means all of my money has to go into green investments. And when I joined the profession 20 plus years ago, it was all about green investing. And I'm glad it's moved on a long way since then, because our money, the way we invest our money, it does have huge amounts of influence, and investors do vote with their feet, and we can influence board decisions and remuneration policies and business strategies. So it's really, really good to hear that. But as you say, there's a lot involved. So how do we actually go about checking whether our pensions are doing good or even doing harm? Where do we find out how they stand at the moment?
Well, a really good starting point is your own pension provider, because if you're in a workplace pension scheme, then they will normally they might have their own microsite, or there'll be a website, probably an app as well, which will tell you, what your pension's worth and the funds it's invested in. If you took your pension out through a financial advisor, then obviously, ping him or her an email, pick up the phone, they will certainly be able to talk you through. If you're still not quite sure, you're thinking, okay, well, I've got the paperwork, I've got all the emails, but I still don't know what that actually means in terms of what the provider is doing, then they will definitely be able to talk you through that. But a number of providers, and Royal London is one of them, are also taking steps in terms of what we're doing with our default pension fund. So most people end up in their provider's default fund, as you well know. And those funds do vary between the different providers. And we know that, obviously it'd be great if people are sort of having a look. But while that money's in the default fund, there's still something that we can do. So a couple of months ago, we basically just did a slight shift with the kind of equities element, so the company shares part of those default funds, and just put a bit more money in those companies that have a lower impact on the environment, so a sort of a lower carbon footprint, if you like, and a bit less in those that are the have the sort of higher impact. And that is already reducing the sort of the carbon footprint of those investments by sort of about 12% or so. So I think it's sort of a combination of, yes, it's great to kind of have a look at where your money's invested. And some people might think, well, actually, I want to make a change. I want to be more active. I want to either make a decision on my own, discuss it with my financial advisor, whatever. But for some people, we know that they're very likely to stay in the default fund, possibly throughout their career. And for them, it's great that there's still something that we can do to make sure that that money is being edged towards those companies that are taking a kind of a lower environmental approach. I think there was just one other thing I'd like to say, though, which is you mentioned about progress, not perfection. I thought that was such a good point, because I think one phrase we're going to hear a lot more about over the coming sort of months and years is the just transition, which is something that, I hadn't heard of until sort of probably the last 12 months or so. But that's looking at how companies transition to net zero. That actually means for both their employees, their customers, and the sort of society that they operate in. Because in a way, again, in the same way that you might have this knee-jerk reaction and think, I don't want my money in that company, but actually having your money in that company, engaging, may be a better, may achieve a better outcome. We also have to think about how companies get to this net zero. And you might think again, well, they should do it as quickly as possible, obviously, But if that means that their employees are out of a job, and they've not had an opportunity to retrain, or the company hasn't thought about what they'll do, or in the case of energy, bills become, they just become too expensive. So that causes real problems actually achieving the aim either. So again, it's just around thinking not just the destination, but actually how do you want to get there, and how do you make sure companies take their employees, their suppliers, their customers with them.
Yeah, and that's such an important point, and the just transition is such an important way of approaching it. And I think when we see these pledges and they talk about it being net zero by 2030 or 2050, it's easy to look at that and dismiss it and say, well, that's just pie in the sky future thinking. We need action today. But you're quite right. It's a balance. We've got to strike this right balance between managing irreversible climate change and the damage that will cause to this planet, and as you say, protecting jobs, protecting livelihoods, and not causing inadvertently more harm to the very people we're trying to protect long term by rushing that transition. But it has to be, as I've said earlier, progress, not perfection. Has to be these steps in the right direction, and fingers crossed. And we can all make a difference. I think, as you've articulated there, Sarah, our pensions are substantial assets in many cases, and I've seen figures in the past that suggest that it's many more times the impact how our pensions invested compared to the stuff we do in our daily lives, whether that's recycling, walking, not driving, not taking foreign holidays, etc. It's all the stuff we should be doing to reduce our footprint. Pensions, actually, we can do it in a relatively simple, effective way.
And also, although, as you say, all those lifestyle changes, I mean, they're things that, they're very important to a lot of people, and they can have an impact. But with a lot of them, they're things that you have to do regularly, so you keep doing them. And it's not to say that, you set up a pension and never think about it again, but it's not something you necessarily have to keep, checking, moving around as regularly as you are making these lifestyle choices. So if you have a sort of think about it, work out what you want to do, talk to your financial advisor if you have one, and then set it up. Yes, you have to review it, but it's not necessarily an action you have to keep taking day in, day out, and to have that, real sizable impact. And I think, just to come back to the sort of starting point about this disconnect between the money that we put into our pensions today and the, what's happening in the world around us. I think, there has been this really, really understandable focus on making sure that you have a good, income in retirement, and making sure you pick your retirement. But, if you have you've got your good pension pot, you've worked out that you can have a kind of a good lifestyle. But if climate change has progressed to such a state that, your house is going to flood every couple of years, or the summers are so hot that you can't keep your home cool, or you can't go outside, that is going to have not just an impact on the kind of life you live, but on your finances as well.
Yeah.
And it really is, I've talked to lots of financial advisors in my kind of career, and I know that lots of them take a real pride in helping their clients to have a good retirement. But it is, about connecting those dots. If it isn't just enough to have the money in your pot, I don't think anymore. It's actually about thinking about the effect on your investments, on the climate and what that means for your own retirement, not just the wider world.
No, that's such an important point and something really key for us all to think about. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. It's lovely to see you as always. And if people want to find out more about the research and the work of Royal London, where should they head?
Well, our website, royallondon.com, is a really good starting point, and we've got lots about responsible investing, including some case studies of where we've made a difference.
Brilliant. I'll make sure I link to that in our description and show notes and things so our listeners, viewers can find that easily. But Sarah, thanks for your time.
Thanks ever so much, Martin. It's really nice to talk to you again.